For everyone who doesn't know me, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Upswing. We started Upswing right at around almost 10 years ago now. It'll be 10 years in March. And we started in Durham, North Carolina. Have gone all around the country since, and I personally have ended up back here. So one of the other interesting things we were talking about is just how everyone here on the panel is actually here in North Carolina right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to first get started with some of the data analytics by Drew, and just some of the information that he's seen and been able to present to NC A&T over the years. And then we're going to have just a little bit of a Q&A session featuring Amy herself, where we'll be able to ask a few questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience as well. And I think it'll be a good time. We'll close at the end of the hour. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump on into today's introductions. So like I said, my name is Melvin Hines. I'm CEO of Upswing, and I've been operating Upswing for the last 10 years. We also have with us here Amy Anderson, who is a higher education professional with over 19 years of experience in the field. She's passionate about creating access to quality educational experiences for marginalized groups. And her areas of expertise include mentoring, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and student success. And currently she serves as the Director of Tutoring and Early Alert Systems at North Carolina A&T State University. So I'm glad to have you here. And we also have with us today, Drew Munger. Drew Munger is the Senior Manager of Research and Analytics here at Upswing. He's been working here for just over 2 years now. He leads the data team's work in setting the data strategy for the company, identifying the impacts of our products and services, and providing analytical support to other teams. Before joining Upswing, he worked in various data roles in K-12 education and began his career as a high school math teacher. So great to have you here as well, Drew, and excited to hear more of what you have to share with the audience.
Great, thanks, Melvin. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of the data. So like Melvin said, the point of kind of the data section of this presentation is to provide a little bit of context for what Amy will be talking about a little bit later in the presentation. And all the data points that I'll be discussing were pulled out from what we call a retention impact study. And this is a study that really has kind of three main components. The first is to identify long-term trends in platform usage, both overall kind of for all students at the school, but then we also dive into specific subgroups, which is what will be relevant for this particular conversation. And the reason that we produced this report is because our platform has built-in reporting capabilities so that users can see kind of who's logging in and who's completing sessions and papers kind of on a day-to-day basis. But the idea behind this report is that it kind of looks more longer term and kind of provides administrators with more of an assessment about how implementation of Upswing is going at their school kind of overall over a longer period of time. The other component of a retention impact study is that we measure the associations between platform usage and important student outcomes. So platform usage isn't good in and of itself, right? What we want is students to actually get better grades, be retained in school, and graduate as a result of that usage. So we measure that as well with the study. And then the last component is an estimate of a cost savings associated with platform usage. So the idea here is that if we're helping schools to retain students, that means that their institutions are accruing additional tuition and fee dollars. So that's a cost savings for the institution. And in a way, we think that Upswing kind of pays for itself because we help students stay in school and graduate. Okay, so that's a little bit of context setting. I have included some definitions here that I'll be referencing on some slides. They're relatively straightforward, but I'll just briefly cover them anyway. So a login is just when a student signs into the Upswing platform. They don't have to do anything at all. As long as they sign in, we count that as kind of like login. The next kind of stage of usage is attempted engagement. And this is when a student schedules a tutoring session or submits an assignment to be reviewed. So all they have to do is schedule or like submit it. Engagement is when a student actually completes those activities. So completes a tutoring session or completes an assignment review. We don't count it as engagement unless the student actually receives the support service. So things like logging in and scheduling sessions don't count until the student's actually like been helped by the platform. And then the last kind of definition is around meaningful engagement. And we think it's really important that students are building a regular practice of getting support often. So we can't consider a student meaningfully engaged if they've completed three or more tutoring sessions or assignment reviews during the academic year. So it doesn't have to be 3 assignment reviews. It can be 2 tutoring sessions and 1 assignment review, but just some combination that adds up to 3 or more is what we consider meaningful engagement. Okay, so those are some quick definitions and some context on this analysis that I did. The first kind of data point that I pulled out is around overall engagement. So the bar chart that you see on the left side of the screen shows a count of engaged students by academic year for the 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021 academic years. That's what was included in the study, those 2 years. And what you see is growth of about 34% from the 1920 academic year to the 2021 academic year in terms of the number of engaged students. And this is really, really high growth. And it's very promising because what it means is that a larger proportion of students at the school are reaching out and getting the support services that they need. So we're really excited to see that level of growth with NC A&T. The other piece that's on this slide is the engagement rate by academic year. And we calculate engagement rate as the number of engaged students divided by the total number of enrolled students at the institution. And so here what you see is growth from 5.36% to 7.05%. So this is growth of about 1.5 percentage points at the school. But what that actually means is that really 1 out of every 14 students at NC A&T is getting help via the support services provided by the platform. So it's both great in that in absolute terms, we see a high proportion of students getting the support that they need. And we're also seeing a really good growth trajectory in terms of additional students engaging with the platform every single year and getting the help they need. Okay, so those are kind of the overall engagement trends. The first thing that I sort of did as a little bit of a deeper dive is to look at which module the students were engaging with. So as I mentioned before, we looked at tutoring usage and assignment review usage. And here what you'll see is a count of students based on which module they used. So the key takeaway here is that just a small number of students actually used both modules in any one given academic year. So what this means is that some students are choosing to use the assignment review module only, and other students are choosing to use the tutoring module only. And kind of the takeaway there is that there's a strong need to provide students with a wide variety of different support options, and then allow the students to kind of pick and choose the support option that works best for them. So in this case, like you see that, if we were to turn off, say, assignment review, it's not like all of those students would be able to get help somewhere else, right? Because they're not also using the tutoring module. And as a more concrete example, we did have one of our partners actually turn off the assignment review module. And it wasn't like tutoring module usage increased a lot the following year. Tutoring module usage stayed flat, and then those students just didn't get the help they need. So our takeaway from this is kind of, again, the need to provide students with a wide variety of supports because they can then pick and choose those that work best for them. Okay. The next finding from the research was what we call the engagement funnel. And these are kind of based on the definitions that I covered on the initial slide. So you can see every step of kind of like the usage process and the percentage of enrolled students that made it to that step. So you can see login in the gray bar there, attempted engagement, which again is just scheduling a session or uploading a paper for review. The blue bar is actually completing that activity, so completing a tutoring session or having an assignment reviewed, and then the red bar is that meaningful engagement. And so you can see the data for the 1920 school year and the 2021 school year. And what you see when you kind of compare each of those bars year over year is that actually all of the bars are getting larger, which means sort of the percentage of students at each level of the engagement funnel is growing. So it's not just that we're turning, engaged users into meaningfully engaged users or attempted users into engaged users, right? It's that actually we're having more logins, we're having more attempts from logins. So basically growth is happening at every stage of the engagement funnel, which means that sort of more students are further along in getting the support that they need. And actually, when you look at the meaningfully engaged number, that number actually almost doubled, not quite, but nearly doubled from one year to the next, which means more students are getting that repeat help that they need. So again, really promising here because we're seeing growth at all levels of the engagement funnel. Okay, then the next slide is here. I'm sorry, it's a little bit small, so I don't know if you can zoom in, but that might be helpful. But basically, this slide shows the same engagement funnel that I showed on the last slide, but broken down by the classification of the student. So you'll see that top bar is first-year students, then one row down is second-year students, third-year students, and fourth-year students. And when you look at the 2021 school year, what you'll see is actually first-year students had higher proportions of students at every level of the engagement funnel compared to second-year, third-year, and fourth-year students. And this is a bit of a surprising finding for Upswing. Typically, when we analyze partner data, what we see is that second-year students and third-year students have highest engagement. And it's really great to see that first-year students at NC A&T have higher engagement, because what it means is that, obviously the first year is like a really critical transition period for students, and we want them to be able to kind of easily go to get the support that they need and know where to go and get connected to academic and other supports. And so what this tells us is actually that first-year students are more aware of the supports that they need and also accessing those supports at higher rates than other students, which is really, really great to see, and definitely different from what we typically see. So this is a positive finding for a specific student subgroup. Next, another student subgroup that I analyzed is students based on kind of where their location is in terms of housing. So here I'm comparing students that are off campus to students that are on campus. Off-campus students are kind of in the top set of bars, and on-campus students are in the bottom set of bars. And what you see here is actually on-campus students at each stage of the engagement funnel have a higher proportion of students sort of interacting with the platform than students that are off campus. This is a little bit of a surprising finding for us, because like one of the things that differentiates Upswing from other support services is that they can be accessed from any time and from anywhere. So we want off-campus students to know that they can access the platform from home, from work if they're working after school or something like that. And so what we'd like to see is the engagement rates at least as high as on-campus students. So we kind of flagged this for Amy as a potential growth area, because it could be the case that maybe students off campus aren't seeing the Upswing flyers or anything like that. And so they're not sure that they can log in and access it anytime, anywhere. So one potential growth area might be to kind of figure out ways to do more outreach to those students. Okay, so two subgroups we looked at. One was positive around first-year students having really great engagement. The other, off-campus students maybe needing a little bit more outreach to get involved into the platform. These are just a couple of the student subgroups that we look at when we do one of these studies. We work with the institution and we talk about kind of what student subgroups are important to them, what subgroups they're targeting for additional interventions, and we show these same breakdowns for those groups. So these are just a couple groups that we're highlighting here in this presentation, but there's lots of others. Okay, and then the last piece in terms of the data is kind of wrapping everything up. So the last part here kind of stops in the top left quadrant, where you see the estimated association between students who use Upswing and students who don't, and then the sort of resulting retention and graduation. And what we found is that students who engage with the platform, so that is complete at least one tutoring session or assignment review, they're 1.4 percentage points more likely to stay in school and graduate than students who don't use the Upswing platform. And that's after controlling for a variety of student characteristics like, major, prior term GPA. So we control for a lot of important factors, and we still see that positive difference there, which means that Upswing students are actually being retained and graduating at higher rates than non-Upswing users. So then what we do is we take that estimate of our association, we multiply that by the number of engaged students. So that's how many students engage with the platform at all during those 2 years. And then what we get is an estimate for the number of additional students that Upswing helped to retain that would not have been retained otherwise. So on average, what we saw with NC A&T is it's about 21.08 additional students that would not have been retained otherwise. So we take that additional retained students, we multiply it by the in-state tuition rates at NC A&T, and then what we get is nearly $75,000 in cost savings associated with Upswing, right? So that's the additional funds that we're potentially saving the university, because those are additional students that are staying in school and graduating. And this might be a conservative estimate because we're just using the in-state tuition rate for NC A&T. Some of those students are likely paying out-of-state tuition rates, and so the cost savings for the university might even be higher. And obviously, this is just kind of like an added bonus, right? Like the primary goal is to provide students with support so that they can stay in school and graduate. But there is this added bonus of Upswing helping to pay for itself because of that additional retained students. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy for the Q&A portion of the presentation. Thanks for letting me share some of the data.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that, Drew. That is definitely really helpful to hear and see. And what I realized I should have mentioned at the beginning of this is that as Drew was presenting, as Amy and I are having a conversation, if there are any questions or comments that anyone has, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat box and the Q&A box. Lakeisha is here and reviewing those, and we'll make sure that those get added into the conversation as well. We want to make sure this is as conversational as possible and that it is also helpful for everyone who's here and listening today. So we've, Drew and I have been talking a lot. Amy, I want to give you a chance to jump in as well here. I think the first thing that I just wanted to ask you is, before we even jump into the retention impact study itself, is just what made you, thinking back all those years ago, what made you, decide that Upswing was something that could potentially be beneficial for your students? And what were the problems that you were hoping to solve by bringing Upswing onto your campus?
Thank you. So as you mentioned earlier, we met at a UNC system-wide function where we were piloting virtual tutoring on campus. And originally we went with another company and we did not like that experience. And we always said, we should have just went with Upswing, myself and my tutorial coordinator at the time. And so when we had the opportunity to change, we did. And so we went with Upswing. I think we started in 2018 and piloted with a small group over the summer. And we wanted to do that because our usage of our tutorial lab was growing. But on campus, the tutoring that I oversee in our area, which is out of the Center for Academic Excellence, we mainly focus on our high DFW courses in our gen ed areas. And so we were having issues when it came to finding support for niche courses or even upper level courses like senior engineering and design courses, and students needing assistance with that. And then also another more practical issue is the area where we were having tutoring, we've lost our security. And so we were having to close the tutorial lab a little bit earlier. We stayed open until 9 originally. We were closing it a little bit earlier because our security guards were no longer in place. And so we had those two reasons. And then we had also done some focus group work to see exactly when students were studying. And we found that those hours were between 12 and 3 for the most part. And so, of course, I don't have any tutors working 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. And so we wanted to find some ways to support that. And so Upswing just seemed to be a natural fit at that point.
Wow, yeah, 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. Those are some pretty early hours. We've seen something similar with our students as well. I don't know if it was quite 12 to 3, but definitely after 6 o'clock, we see a huge spike in terms of the students who are coming in. I wanted to ask a question about actually one of the, and thank you for sharing that background there. I wanted to ask a question about how you are working with your first year students. Drew, if you don't mind going back, I think it's maybe 2 slides that show, or maybe 3 slides that show the difference between the first year students and in second year. So what was really interesting, I noticed here as well, was that there is such a huge growth in terms of engagement, particularly with those entering first year students. And that's such a critical year. So I would just love to hear, what are some of the ways that you are tackling engagement on your campus and causing first year students to actually jump in and say, you know what, I'm going to proactively get the help that I'm looking for instead of maybe waiting a year for, grades to not be where I want them to be before I actually get that help.
So we're fortunate, and in a Center for Academic Excellence, there's a couple areas housed under our belt. So we have our first year experience course in our area. We also have a Math 101E course, which is sort of an entry-level math course for a lot of students who don't meet a certain SAT score. And so you have a lot of freshmen in that course. In our area, we also advise our undeclared freshman students. And we also have several mentoring groups as well. And so it was easy to sort of kind of push that support to our first year students because we have all those different avenues. And so being intentional, I'm on a first year committee. And so working with those teachers to make sure that we're mentioning it in class our first week, like when we go over Blackboard and we go over ePortfolio, which is what our students use to turn in assignments, that we're also going over Upswing at that point, and that we're mentioning it. We were able to get it on in our university template for our syllabi for all teachers. Upswing is now in there as recommended for tutoring, as well as our tutoring center where we have in-person face-to-face tutoring hours. And so, but we are also strategic. Part of my titles over early alert systems. And so we have an early alert system on campus where we do progress reports for students. And we do those 3 times strategically throughout the semester. And part of the referral, one of the flags you can raise is, of course, a tutoring flag and a referral to that. And so whenever I get those tutoring referrals, I definitely send them information about Upswing and tutoring. I also heavily promote during the first 2 weeks of school to, this is what Upswing, this is the tutoring lab, to seek those resources early and often so that they have that at the top when they're coming into school in those first couple of weeks. And then they also get it throughout the semester consistently. I'm constantly sending emails, and we're on IG, and wherever the students are, we try to be. We've actually backed away from flyers and tabling a little bit because they're more on their phones than anything. So I push texts, I push emails, and we push IG a lot, Instagram a lot.
Wow, that sounds like a really big lift there. And I like that you mentioned that. I like that you mentioned that there are that you're trying to get faculty involved with the syllabi and things like that. That's something that we've seen a really big deal here at Upswing as well. Is that if we can get them part of the conversation, then students will know about this a lot more as well. But it sounds like that's a huge a huge lift for your department. What does it look like at the beginning of the year for you all to be able to accomplish all those things and make sure that things don't fall through the cracks?
Well, I think every campus at the beginning of the year is hectic. And right now, as we go into advising for the spring, right, it's very busy and hectic because we're in the middle of registration. So it definitely is consistent and constant reminders, to faculty and to students, because everybody's busy prepping for the new year. We're also very fortunate in that our Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management used to work in our area. And so she will push Upswing through the orientation funnel as well for us. And so they're getting it several different ways from several different people so that they're, aware. And then, we also want to make sure I send the information also directly to faculty and advisors so that they're just, prompted to remember that when you're meeting with your students and you're having your advising sessions in your one-on-ones, that this is a resource that you can share with students.
I see that Lakeisha has a question here. I'll let her jump on in to ask that. Go ahead, Lakeisha.
Sure. This is a question from the chat from Corey. How do you feel Upswing's honor messaging has helped support and keep students on track?
Oh, okay. So and we haven't done like an ANA impact per se, but I think it's very good because we have been able to work with our, Upswing to really identify key times of sending students reminders like about advising, meeting with their advisors, tutoring as well. And so that has been very impactful because I do get the elevations, like when something has to be elevated. So, I get to see that. And I do get sort of like a quarterly, well, maybe more than quarterly, monthly report on how the ANA messaging is going and the impact and engagement. And so students will engage with ANA. They'll send messages back or questions back. And that's when I will be contacted if there's like an elevation. And so I have couple of times been able to intervene when students were thinking about dropping out of school. I've contacted their advisor on their behalf. If there's been other mental health issue, I've reached out to the director of counseling, and she's been super supportive and jumping in and handling those issues. And so those little reminders and those little check-ins really do help to keep students on track. But then also, like Melvin mentioned earlier, it's easy for things to slip through the cracks when you're faculty and you're doing research, or you're an advisor and you have a caseload of 200 students. You might not necessarily catch that a student is thinking about stopping out or dropping out. And so when ANA does those little check-ins, if it comes back like, hey, I really am thinking about leaving the university, that's just another level of support to help catch that student where their advisor may not have been aware.
Thank you. I was on ANA support this weekend. I'm pretty sure I answered one of your students.
They're active. They will text you back.
And for those who don't know what we're talking about with ANA is Upswing's virtual assistant platform. It's all over text message, so SMS based, and it is a combination of both kind of AI as well as human-centered support. And so the idea is that is to proactively check in with students, to really kind of engage those students that won't normally engage with typical on-campus resources, so that we can find out why they might be at risk of, either quitting school or stopping out or dropping out altogether, and can we get them the right resource at the right time? And so NC&T's been using ANA for the last couple of years, and so that's where that question is coming there from. So thanks so much for sharing about that, Amy. One question I had was particular, we were talking about engagement, and I think that when we slice up your student groups, it's also really interesting to see high engagements among certain groups. So in particular, your student athletes, your trio students, and your transfer students have all had high levels of engagement. I'd love to understand what you all have been doing there to really make sure that there's high engagement there. If that has anything to do with the mentoring programs you mentioned earlier on, or if there are other really key activities that you're doing to make sure there's high engagement there.
Sure. Our athletes specifically, another area that falls under Center for Academic Excellence is athletic advising. And so I work very closely with the athletic advisors on campus. I provide tutors for their study hall. But what we were talking, and what they were saying is when the students travel, and it's not just the athletes, also the university band, when they travel, they were not having that support. And so we were able, when Upswing came on campus, they were extremely grateful and thankful. And so when the athletes and the band members travel, they're able to just log in and get that same level of support that they would if they were on campus. And that's been very beneficial because our athletes do perform at a very high level and they have to stay eligible. And so we want to keep it that way for them. I also have a really good relationship with our trio director. And so working with her to, even during COVID, to get her student tutors on the platform tutoring, but then also to provide, to push Upswing to them. And then we also work with our new transfers as well. Our A&T has a goal to really increase our transfer enrollment. But when you get the transfers here, we have to support them, right? So making sure that they know about Upswing, and I have a good relationship with our distance learning and our transfer office to make sure that the students are getting that information. And so I think at the base of it, I would say relationships are key on campus. I think everybody knows that to get something done, you have to have really good relationships in all your functional areas on campus. And I'm fortunate enough to have coworkers and colleagues who, when I ask, we have this great platform and this great support, please help me get it out there, that they're very willing to do so. But I think specifically with those athletes and those transfer students in the band, I know you didn't throw that in there, but I am, because they travel and because transfer students are coming into the institution looking, they're familiar with the campus. So they're looking for what are the things I can engage in to support as I matriculate into a new school, that this is something that definitely pops for them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you added in the band. Thanks for including them as well. It's really important for those who aren't just on campus as students, but also have a second life as student athletes or those with extracurriculars to be supported throughout those experiences as well. And so it's really exciting to hear that Upswing's been able to help support them. I did want to turn back to the COVID question, but I'm going to pause on that for a second to first just ask, I know that you've seen this retention impact study report here before. Were there any things that surprised you when Drew shared just some of the impacts and just some of the data that was seen here? Was there anything that stood out to you immediately as, oh wow, that's interesting, I didn't know that would be the case for our campus?
Right. One thing that surprised, which I actually spoke to our provost about, in addition to having to work, I guess, more with off-campus students, is actually our distance learner students don't use the product as much as our main campus students, which I found to be very interesting. Like, I thought that those would be the number one students taking advantage of the product. And so, and I literally have no explanation for that. I don't know why our distance learners aren't engaged. I know our coordinator for distance learning is pushing the product heavily. And I actually saw him over the weekend at homecoming. And we were like, we have to get together to figure that out, create a strategy around how we want to get our distance learners involved. But that was the main thing. And then another thing was, we didn't include it, but Drew actually did a really good job of seeing when students are engaging with the product. And we did see late night usage, I think was still a trend, but we also saw a lot of weekend usage. And so that just kind of reaffirmed that I'm glad I have a product like that in place, because definitely didn't think students were using it on the weekend as much as they would during the week, but they were. I think it was a high number, like 20% or something like that, but there was a lot of engagement on the weekend as well.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Drew, I'd love to just get your thoughts on why you think there might have been such a high weekend engagement rate here, as well as, I know you were originally talking about this, but would love to hear some of your thoughts as well on perhaps, what might be some of the reasons why on-campus students might be resonating with the platform a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say for the weekend and night usage is something that we've seen with a lot of other partners as well, because students obviously still need academic support after the on-campus tutoring center is closed, or maybe they don't want to leave the dorm on the weekends and still want to get help. And so it's not so surprising that weekends and nights are really popular. And I believe it's somewhere above 40% of tutoring sessions occur like after 6 p.m. and before 8 a.m. the next day. So we do see quite a large number of sessions that are occurring during that time. And that's not unique to NC A&T, that's consistent with all of our other partners as well. And then in terms of the off-campus students, I think potentially one hypothesis is that On-campus students are probably more likely to be first-year students as well. I don't know if there's like a residency requirement or not at NC&T. So they might be like kind of correlated, right? In that we know that first-year students have really high engagement. Well, those students are probably also more likely to be on campus, and so that might be driving some of those numbers as well. In terms of the distance learners, I'm not sure what might be driving that, because that is something that might be unique to NC&T. Especially because for those students, obviously they're not going to be in a position to go to the tutoring center on campus. So this might be one of their few avenues to get support. So I think some more investigation might be needed there to try to figure out why they're not using the platform as much.
Great thoughts there. Good thoughts there. Certainly some things to look into for sure. I just had a couple more questions for you, Amy. And then I'd love to turn to the audience and see if there are any additional questions that everyone else might have. The first one is going back to that COVID question. And really, I just wanted to, take us back to when COVID, first kind of came on the scene. All of a sudden, everything that you probably just knew as being, this is how we're going to handle each year, suddenly kind of change suddenly, and you likely had to figure out how to just make some of those changes, adapt. And now we're seeing kind of in this, I guess you call it post-COVID moment, where students are coming on campus who are the students that were online students for most students for the last 2 years and didn't always have some of the some of the etiquette, some of the just kind of learning experiences that typically people would get in, say, their 11th grade and 12th grade. And so that might present its own set of challenges for you during the course of this academic year. What have you noticed that you and your team have had to do differently just to adapt to perhaps a new type of student who's on campus, or or a student that might not always have many of the learnings that you would typically expect, or experiences that you would expect as they're coming to school now?
So one thing I've noticed with students, and it's interesting because I just came back from a conference, is that there are definitely some learning gaps that are presenting themselves that I did not notice, or maybe were not as prevalent before, let me say that. And so, like I mentioned earlier, our Math 101E course, which is a foundational math course, we have seen enrollment in that spike tremendously. So having to offer more sections of that, and just different things, like even in the class, because I also teach. So even in my classroom, some things even around, reading comprehension and writing. And so I think that having Upswing in place to provide a support, because even though we do have SI for like that particular course, Math 101E, we're finding that in addition to SI, they also want to receive additional tutoring, and might need it consistently. Like when I go in the back end of Upswing, like Drew mentioned, I'm definitely seeing more students create repeat appointments over and over and over again. And so that was a big change. And there was a moment we were experimenting with limitations, like limiting how many sessions a student could get. And after speaking with my supervisor, who's the vice provost for student success, we decided to take the limitations off because students were needing additional support after coming out of those COVID years and being back in the classroom, and some of the expectations of even the amount of homework that they're getting. I advised a group of students. I had a student tell me yesterday, I didn't expect all my classes to give me homework at one time. I was like, oh, that's college. One, but two, we have to figure out some organization around that. Right. Right. And so needing that for them, so having that in place for them, I think has been crucial to kind of help fill some of those gaps that they might have been missing coming out of high school. And then also me being able to have one thing I did not have, because like I said, we've been on Upswing since 2018. I did not have my tutors on the platform until COVID. And so, and then post-COVID, I have left them on there because I found that it's much more easier for students to access them. And even if they want an in-person appointment, it's much more easier for them to do it through that platform than how we were previously doing it. And it gives the tutor flexibility because my tutors weren't working on the weekends previously as well. But after the impact report and then some of the flexibility, I've allowed them the capability to work on the weekend. So that gives them more flexibility as well. So they're able to tutor through the platform or set up an in-person appointment through the platform and then meet the student in the library or our tutorial lab, even over the weekend now. And so while we never offered really weekend tutoring, now it's sort of more available to students.
Gotcha. And that's a really good point. I'm sure your students really love the idea that they can meet with your own campus tutors, either in person or online. It creates a level of synergy or you know, it's not, oh, I have to meet with different people if I go online versus in person. Now they're getting the opportunity to still meet with, you know, with Amy or whomever in a virtual setting as well if you can't make it on campus.
Right. And the analytics for me are good because we are, this particular product is funded through Title III. And so I have to provide a quarterly report. And so being able to easily access those analytics has been huge for me. Instead of me crunching numbers on my own, the dashboard has been very beneficial for being able to provide that.
That's awesome. That's great. One last question I just had for you is, not everyone who is on the call today is an HBCU. And so I know that there are certain types of supports, and this might even be going back to the mentoring we were talking about earlier on, that is just really important in particular for you know, various different minority groups to be able to make sure that they have as they're going through school. You know, I mentioned a lot of times that part of why I started Upswing was my experience going to University of Georgia, where there just weren't a lot of students that looked like me. And I was, you know, one of the first in my family to go through college. And so a lot of times there was the mix of feeling intimidated by the sheer number of students, as well as being intimidated by not wanting to be seen as someone who needed help. And so I just want to ask you, what are perhaps some maybe takeaway points or leave-away points that you would just share with the audience for ways to make sure that as they are supporting their, you know, minority groups, whether male minority groups or other groups that you're kind of thinking of, to make sure that they're being supported on their campuses as well?
Yeah, and I forgot we also had a connection because I used to work at UGA. So I forgot about that. But when working with, because I've worked with the mentoring groups, the male mentoring groups specifically on campus, and then we also have a female mentoring group, Sisters, and any marginalized group, you're dealing with a couple factors. If they're a first generation population, they may not know all the different supports that exist on campus. And so telling students and modeling for them where they can go for support and doing it consistently and over is especially important when working with first generation students, because they might not have an immediate family member they can go to ask that for. But then also working with male students specifically, and I'm going to throw the athletes in there, they don't really ask for help. And so you have to offer help as opposed to them just saying, I'm going to reach out, because there is some stigma around that of, I don't want to be seen as not knowing. I don't want to be perceived as dumb. I don't want to be perceived as, you know, not intelligent.
Not belonging here.
Not belonging, yeah. Thank you. Not belonging in a college environment. And so we want to make sure that we're reaching out to those students consistently and often so that they know that there's help and that they're there to support. and, you know, encouraging them from, like I said, several different mediums. If it's their academic advisor, their teacher, their coach, their band director, you know, I want to make sure that everybody is definitely supporting the student and pushing the resources so that they know that they're available. So I think that that's very key. And just in general, I've tried to be, even though I work at a HBCU, we do have a good population of Latino and Caucasian students. So just making sure my staff is diversified is sort of at the forefront of my mind when I'm hiring students, making sure that I have a diverse looking students. When one thing that my hero at Upswing, because we had conversations when we first started marketing, and they sent me some marketing, I was like, this marketing is not going to work for my campus. So just being aware about your campus diversity, what that looks like, what even the marketing looks like, so that, you know, you want to make sure you have on your flyers Black males. You want to make sure you have on your flyers females, the Latinos, Pacific, Asian, Pacific Islanders, so that they know that, okay, this just is a resource for one population of students. I think it would be easy at my school, being an HBCU, if I were a white or Latino student, if everything, all the flyers I saw just had all Black students on it, they might think, oh, if I go in there, there's nobody gonna be there that does look like me or something like that. And so I think, you know, we've been intentional about how our website looks, how our marketing looks, the type of hiring that we're doing, making sure that that's diverse, so students feel comfortable coming into the area. So I think that that's key when you're kind of thinking about offering services to a diverse student body population.
Really important, really important. Thanks for sharing that. Those were all the questions that I had, and thanks so much, Amy, for just giving us more of your perspective here. I'd love to open it up to the audience and see if there are any questions that anyone has that they would like to share in the last few minutes that we have here.
I have a question from Erica. What strategies do you use to help faculty understand the benefits of Upswing?
Yeah, so we have, I feel like I'm saying everything comes out of our office. It doesn't, but we do, because I'm over early alert systems, we do training for faculty. And in that training, I highlight Upswing. And so when I'm doing that, I definitely make sure to highlight the benefits, make sure they know it's a resource and a tool. I've even done demonstrations for faculty. Some of my more involved faculty advisors, I think we've even given them a student account so they can go in and fiddle around and see it for themselves, so that they feel comfortable when they're explaining it to them. And so that's how we've done that with our first year experience advisors. Because I am on that committee with them, I'm able to walk them through that and just kind of encourage them, like I said, to offer that as a resource during the first week or two of classes each semester, and then answer any questions they have about that. The second thing, when we first onboarded Upswing back in 2018, my provost was very intentional. She loves to do road shows. I don't know if they call them that at every institution, but basically where you go to every college's department meeting and get a few minutes on the agenda to talk about whatever new product you're offering as far as student support is concerned. And so I think the fact that my supervisor is a provost was beneficial, because she was definitely able to get us on those agendas early on. And I was able to share that with deans and chairs and faculty very early on.
I love that. That's awesome. I could definitely see how that would be impactful, especially during that brainstorming part of just before the new year, when everyone needs to kind of get their bearings straight. I could see that being beneficial.
Yeah. And
Any other
sneaking it
questions?
in. I was just
sorry,
going to say, if you have like, we have faculty staff institutes every semester. So sneaking it in there on that agenda and, you know, rolling it in with professional development is good as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I actually have a question for you. what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about bringing Upswing on their campus about how they can, what they need to be thinking about doing to make sure that it's successful and that the students and staff and faculty get the most out of the product?
That's a good question. I think that's a good question. Were we that intentional in the beginning? I don't know. But so I would advise definitely having someone in your corner, a provost, a dean, who can kind of, when they speak, other people listen, who can kind of promote on your behalf. I think that that's good. I think strategizing, like I said, we were fortunate because the vice chancellor for enrollment management used to work in our area. And so I have a relationship with her. So getting that information out during orientation has been key, because then you're getting that to students before they even get to campus. And when students are preparing to come to your university, that is when them and their parents, I believe I also sent out in the parent letter, are at the most high alert, because they're trying to make sure they have everything they need to get their child situated in school. And so just being creative and thinking about those different ways, of course, using your social media platform, but also thinking strategically about when students access their email and read those items. I was able to work with a colleague over in our, he runs the gym, but that's not the professional way of saying that. But, our rec center. And he had done some research around when students typically read their emails. And I was in a meeting with that. And so he shared that on our campus, that's really between 7 and 9 p.m. So when I push things to students, I don't push it till 7 to 9 p.m. because that's when they're most likely going to open it. So I was sending things previously during the day, because that's when I'm at work, between 8 and 5. Well, students, we know they're not up at 8, and throughout the day, they're busy throughout their classes. So they weren't checking emails and things like that till 9. So if you have somebody on your campus that has maybe done some research around like best times to advertise to students, best mediums, I would definitely suggest getting with that person and getting in on that research, because that's going to be a great way to kind of, when you're setting up your communication strategy, to do that. Also talking with your public relations office about the best place to put your links on your website. I was able to do that with ours, and he was very helpful, where we strategically put our links for Upswing so students can access it in various areas of our website. So I just think, and then definitely getting it in your first year experience courses, getting it to your professors early enough so that they can put it on their syllabi, and encouraging them to address it in the first day or two of class, I think is definitely key. So just think about on your campus, who are those people you have relationships with, and how you can leverage those relationships so that they could be your megaphones. So that takes the lift completely, it's not completely on your shoulders, that you have other people, because student success isn't just one person's job, it's the campus's job. So once you get that buy-in, everybody should be talking about Upswing or what you have to offer.
I love that. Yeah, that's a really good idea. And I know Drew would certainly second the idea of making sure to speak to the research teams to find out about what type of research is going on there. I remember even this must have been 2 or 3 years ago now, that we had actually found out that the level of students reading emails that we were sending out dropped during finals period, but was like relatively high before then. And our assumption with that was that perhaps, once you're in finals period, you're not really in classes anymore. And so, you're not really paying as much attention to email. So it could certainly be different things for different environments, and knowing when that engagement and activity is going to have the most benefit is going to be key. So thanks for sharing that as well. So I think we're at the top of the hour here. So I really appreciate everyone coming in and listening to us today, and especially appreciate you, Amy, for just sharing just so much of your insights and information and ideas that will hopefully help so many other people who are also trying to support their students on their campus. If anyone has any questions or other thoughts for Amy, certainly feel free to message her. And if anyone has any questions or questions or comments for us here at Upswing, we'd love to have those as well. Thanks again to everyone for their time. Any final parting words you want to share, Amy, Drew, or Lakeisha?
I'm just going to say thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully, I have many more lessons to learn myself. So hopefully in a few years, we'll see, I have some new insights on how to reach these distance learning students and some other stuff. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I second that. Thank you for coming. And we hope that it was helpful to people to kind of get a sense for how someone who uses Upswing uses it directly from them, because every campus is unique and you have to figure out the way to make things work within the systems that you have. So I think you, Amy, you shared some great ideas with people, and I've seen in the chat that people are taking things away from the stuff that you were talking about. So that's the purpose of these webinars. We appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.